welcome back to my channel, Manga Hoarder. My name is Laura, and today I am guest talking about Blade of the Immortal. This was a manga that I read for the Manga Love Readathon, which happened over the Valentine's Day long weekend. I'll leave up the information down below. Happens every once in a while, probably will happen again. I was planning on reading a couple of other titles for this readathon, but once I got started reading Blade of the Immortal, I found it really difficult to jump into something else. Not because I didn't want to read something else or because this was engaging me so well, which it was. I just found it really difficult to switch gears from this story because it is so intense and it is so different than a lot of kind of the more popular style of manga. So it was really hard to kind of switch gears and mentally get into a new kind of mental space. So I am going to talk about this manga. I haven't planned for this. I do have some notes, but this is going to be a really disorganized video, as well as the fact that this manga is really important, I think, to read for its art. I think the art is really the star of what this manga is about. And so, you know, normally I would just, I can't even hold up lots of things. Normally I would just, you know, hold up a frame and you can see it, but I think what I'm going to do is I'll try and find good examples of what I'm talking about and put some overlays, so you might, you may or may not be getting some particular close-up shots, but I don't know that I want to hold this up the entire time because I'm actually having a bit of carpal tunnel and it is quite painful at the moment to be holding books up. So I just want to talk about what this book is about. So really, Blade of the Immortal is about two characters. I have to pick it up eventually. Two characters which are on the cover of this particular volume, Manji and Rin. Manji is sort of the star, is the Blade of the Immortal. He is given immortality and is planning on using it sort of to right some wrongs that he has committed in the past. To right these wrongs, he is planning on killing 1,000 bad guys. And when that happens, I'm not entirely sure what it is that he's trying to achieve after killing those 1,000, if he sort of feels like his sins will be cleansed, or if he will then become mortal, or he will kill himself. I'm not entirely clear on that particular thing, but this is sort of his mission. He's going to kill 1,000 bad guys. He doesn't necessarily know what bad guys are, and even over the course of the series there is a discussion of what does that really mean, and why does killing 1,000 people actually absolve you of this past action that you've taken. So it does have actually some moral discussion, which is really kind of interesting in the series. It is also about the character Rin, and mostly actually I think follows her story because his life, he's immortal essentially, and so his life will continue long after this manga, but her life is finite, and she is his first sort of first leg of his journey to kill these bad guys. She has witnessed the violent murder of her family, and so has decided, taking it upon herself to avenge them. Her father was the head of a dojo, and some people have come in and murdered him. They've also been going along and destroying all of the dojos, and sort of absolving anybody who was part of those dojos who wants to join them will join them. And so in her particular case, she is now the only living person left from that dojo, and so she has spent her time training, and now she wants to go and avenge her family, but she's not strong enough to do that on her own, and so gets the help of Manji. And so he takes her under his wing, very much like a sister, you know, very closely guarded, very much her partner throughout this entire journey, and it is a really unusual, good, close relationship throughout the manga, and really liked their particular story, their relationship throughout this story. And so basically it is the story of resolving her particular need to avenge her family. Because once that happens, he of course needs to, he doesn't need to be around anymore. He's done his job and he can move on. So this takes place during the feudal era. So this is sort of the time of the shogun, the time of samurai. So there is a lot of political intrigue. There's a lot of fighting and battle, and of course then, you know, also the time of all of these dojos, which have different schools of fighters, or different schools of martial arts, I guess. And so it is a very violent, very brutal period of history, and this is a very, very, very violent, very, very brutal manga. It definitely, it shocked me in many ways. In many instances, I was certainly surprised. Every once in a while I thought, did he maybe take it too far, Hiroaki Samura? Did he go too far with this? There was times when I was sitting next to my sister reading it, and I would exclaim or shout or almost, you know, scream because I was so horrified by whatever was going on the page. And you know, that doesn't happen very often for me. You know, I read everything. I read all of it. I don't really care what the content is normally, but this one in particular I found really shocking. However, I also didn't think it wasn't shocking without purpose. It wasn't that it was being drawn just to shock you, but it made sense within the context of the story, made sense within the context of the history that was being portrayed. It is just a very, very violent and bloody and horrifying life in this manga. There is a lot of brutal murders, a lot of dismemberment, and a heck of a lot of rape. So, you know, if you are sensitive as a reader, you know, stand clear. There's no page in here that you can, or maybe there's a page here and there that you can read, but for the most part, you're not going to get away traumatized. Or not traumatized. This is a violent, brutal series. But it is a beautiful series, and the story is strong, the characters are strong, and it's got kind of two of my favorite things about manga is that there is sort of the ambiguous good versus evil. There is one character who is just decidedly evil, but everybody else, and there's sort of kind of like four nodes that are fighting against each other in the series. Everybody else are bad, but they all could have a good purpose, just depends on what side you're on. So it's really interesting in that way, and I think it really is more real in that way. You know, I don't think there's too many people who could say are pure evil or purely good. You know, it's very ambiguous, and so you have to kind of, you're making decisions as well as they are, and even in the final battle, they are saying, you know, you can't say anything because you also have done all of the same things I've done. It's just that you're on a different side than I am. You know, all of these people who are fighting against each other really could all have been friends. It's just that they happen to be on opposite sides. So it's really interesting in that way. The other thing I like about it is that this is a story about a young girl who hires a tough man to protect her, but she herself is very strong. She's not a damsel in distress, and many times it's actually her that is necessary in order to save him. He gets himself into quite a fix kind of mid-series, and it's her and another little teenage girl who basically start this cataclysmic event, which rescues him as well as this other huge fighter. And so it's just, I particularly like this plot, this type of plot. It is the same type of story that you see in one of his short stories in Emerald. You also see a lot of the same kind of brutal violence in Emerald, so if you want to see if you can handle Blade of the Immortal, I would actually try maybe reading Emerald first, because it is horrifying in many cases. But the title story, Emerald, has the same plot. It's also the same story as, what am I thinking of? It's a Western novel, Charles Portis. Oh, I'm going to sit here and think about it. True Grit. So it's the same kind of story as True Grit. You know, this tough woman needs to avenge, or tough young woman, you know, basically a teenager, needs to avenge her family, and takes along this tough character to help her. You know, she's not strong enough to take down all of the people, but she's strong enough to take down some of the people. She just needs some help. And so I really, really like that. The women in this particular story are kind of twofold. Like, they're all really beautiful, but they're not really anime fan service buxom. You know, like, they don't have huge boobs, and they're not really, like, they're not airheads like you would get in most sort of any sort of fan service based comedy. You have a particular style of character. These are all women that look like women, which is really nice. They're all pretty much the same kind of woman. They have some they have some variances in their appearance, in their heights, but they all kind of are the same. The same size, the same build, but they look like women, which is really nice. They're all strong. All of them are strong. And the strongest character is a woman. She's stronger than the strongest male character. And so that's really, like, they fight, they kill, they do their job, they're spies, they're awesome. I really like the women in this series, but they also are treated like women in feudal era Japan. You know, they're still not, like, there's still sort of a hierarchy, there's still a level. You know, they still are constantly being raped or treated badly, but some of them are they're so great. They're some of my favorite characters in this manga. They have personalities, they're smart, and they're so strong. And so, yeah, they're just really, really wonderful in this manga. So I really like the women in this manga. The men vary. The men vary in this manga. Some of them are quite strong. I think that, unfortunately, like, it goes, for the first sort of half, 3/4 of the manga, I would say all of the men have sort of traditional builds, or traditional slightly bigger, slightly more muscular builds than I would expect, but fairly traditional build. But then you get into just sort of the last 3/4 of the manga, or last quarter of the manga, and the men all of a sudden start getting really huge. And I think it's just sort of takes it out of the reality or the history, and starts to make it a little more cartoony, and it takes away a little bit of the seriousness of the situation. So I was really disappointed that some of the characters started to change in that way. Like, they started to really become more cartoony, even though they're very violent, they're very strong, you know, they're forbidding. I didn't like that there was some non-traditional form for the male figures, and so I got a little disappointed partway through the manga. All of the main characters are sort of traditional male figures, but yeah, there's just a couple on the side that I was just like, oh, did you have to include them like that? Like, couldn't you have drawn them more normal, or more, you know, under 6 feet? Maybe. That would have been really nice. So anyway, that was sort of one of my thoughts. I am running away, haven't even looked at my notes. Okay, I have read my notes now. So there were some parts in the middle where I thought the story started to drag. Some of it had to do with the writing, or the fact that, you know, it's a long story and you have to move characters from A to B, and some of that takes time, and so the story doesn't necessarily progress quickly in those areas. So there was parts where the story did start to drag, and sometimes, particularly as you got deeper and deeper into the story and started to see more and more characters and learn their names and learn what their positions were in society and what groups they belonged to, there was more and more Japanese words being left in the translation. So sometimes, you know, in a speech bubble, you would have 5 unfamiliar words, and so if you weren't keeping up with reviewing the glossary, or weren't keeping up with reading the manga consistently, you would really start to forget what was being talked about or who was being talked about. So I don't think that that was the fault of translation. I think that that was actually completely necessary, and actually one of the good things about the translation was leaving all of those Japanese words in. There's no English equivalent to those words. I think you have to leave them in, particularly because this is trying to represent a historical period which is so distinct to Japan. You know, to leave in the words that refer to that particular period makes sense. But it is hard as someone who doesn't necessarily know all those words. You know, and I know a bit of Japanese history, but I don't know everything, and so, you know, I was struggling for some of it, or it was definitely slowing down the reading pace. For something that was so high action was really unusual. So I did find that, you know, in the middle I was starting to feel it was a bit of a slog to get through, but then at the same time, there wasn't a page where I wasn't like completely astounded by how beautiful the artwork was. Hiroaki Samura loves drawing female figure. That is so obvious, it's ridiculous. So all of the women are so beautiful. Like, those are some of the most beautiful drawings. He really, really understands sequence of movement. So there are quite a lot of pages where you actually get almost like screen captures of fight scenes where characters moving through all of their sword movements or their fight, and you get to see the movement of the fight from panel to panel, and they are so incredibly beautiful. There also is this really great trick that Samura uses that I don't see in a lot of manga, where he draws the fights, mostly the fights, from the perspective of the character fighting. And so you will be, you know, reading the story about a particular character, and then all of a sudden they are in the middle of battle, and then you are given their perspective. So it is through their eyes that you are seeing the fight scenes. I think the best example is in the final volume, so sorry about that. I guess it's sort of spoilers. I don't think you're gonna I don't think you'll be spoiled for too much. But in the very final kind of battle, Rin is laying on the ground, and this isn't even actually the perspective of someone in the battle. This is her laying on the ground, and all of a sudden the illustration shifts so that it is also in perspective to how she would be viewing it as someone who is laying on the ground. It is so good in that way. There's also a few instances, and I hope I can find examples of when a character is actually just moving through a battle. You know, you will often see in anime a character will be running through this crowd, and then by the time they get to the end of the crowd, all the people have fallen over. You see that a lot in fight anime. And in this one, you know, you get that perspective of what is happening as that really powerful character is running through the crowd, and so you get to see the action of every single sword swing. Those ones are such breathtaking sequence of illustration. The art in this is so beautiful. And then, on top of it, there's just so much about the art in this in particular that I was absolutely in love with. This particular manga, it starts out with almost entirely pencil drawing. I think pencil probably for the first 2 or 3 chapters, is all that's used. And then the pencil starts to decrease. So there is pencil until about the second last, I don't think it's in the last volume, but there is second last volume. But whenever the pencil appears, it's almost like you're given an impression of what is going on. Sort of like this is a memory of what happened, or this is just sort of everything happens sort of in a haze. It is such a good trick for something that's both historical as well as fast-paced, as well as fight scenes in particular, because you never really get a full impression of what's happening. So I think pencil is so cleverly used, and I don't know if it's intentional or if it was just a fast medium to use. The art definitely changes over time. In the beginning, you know, you use the pencil. In the end, definitely is using more ink. The illustration style doesn't change too much, although you can tell that he gets more comfortable with these particular characters, and so the characters themselves get cleaner and cleaner as they're drawn. The one thing that I found really interesting is at the beginning, you know, you're given this sort of thought in your head, well, he's going to, or Manji is going to kill 1,000 people. And at the beginning, when he fights sort of the big boss character, or the big, you know, opponent, there's always a 2-page spread finishing move, which is so beautiful. So there was quite a few. I can't remember, there was 4 or 5 of these 2-page, you know, kind of splash page type spreads of finishing moves, and then all of a sudden you just don't get those 2-page finishing moves anymore. Like, there is finishing moves, obviously, you know, that last swipe where he holds the pose at the end and the person's head is, you know, gushing off or whatever, but it felt like, you know, this finishing move was going to be the countdown of 1,000, and I almost wonder if Samura was thinking, I'm going to use these, and once I've got 1,000 of these I can end the series, but then all of a sudden that just sort of stopped, and I really am curious about that in particular. So that would be really something I would like to know about, but because that's something I was thinking about when I was reading it, is, oh, we're going to see this, it's going to be kind of a countdown, it'll be a tally by the end. Obviously he doesn't necessarily make it to that, and the story becomes something a lot deeper than just killing bad guys. The characters deepen, the relationships deepen, people you like die, people you don't like die, everybody dies pretty much. It is, yeah, it's a good old time. What else do I have to say? I guess the only other thing that I have to say about it is that this is read in the English reading direction from, what's the English reading direction? Left to right. I'm so used to reading in Japanese reading direction. I even pick up novels sometimes and start reading them. I'm just like, what's going on? Oh, it's because I'm at the back of the book. Samura is written, it's not written, it's arranged. I can't speak. Samura is written. Oh my goodness, this is really bad. Blade of the Immortal is arranged in the left to right reading order. It is not a perfect flip. You know, originally when manga was being brought over to North America or into English, it was all being just sort of a mirror flip of the manga, and then printed that way because that seemed to be easier for English readers. And I still hear that complaint from English readers, that it's hard to read manga because they're in a different reading direction. However, when Samurai, I'm just going to keep saying that because it's about Samurai. Samura, when he agreed to have this localized, brought to North America, he was involved in rearranging the panels, rearranging the art, the action sequences to make it make sense. In a way, it helps definitely with the reading. Mirror image is just not the perfect way to read manga. It really should be read in the proper sequence, because, you know, if action moves, you know, from one side of the page, it usually moves to the bottom corner of the page, and that makes sense then to start reading at the top, you know, corner. It always kind of reading towards the hinge or the spine of the book, and so when you do that flip, it doesn't really always make sense, the action. It doesn't move the action as well. So Samura was really instrumental in trying to make this as accessible as possible, and I think it's one of the reasons why we're still getting reprints in this English language direction, because this has been reconstructed for an English language audience. It's not a flip, it's a reconstruction. And so unfortunately there are also moments where the action just doesn't make sense, and I'm not sure that I can even give you an example of this or if I'll be able to find an example, but there were times where I would struggle with what exactly was going on because it didn't match up with what was happening in the next sequence. And I know for a fact that Samura is very good at the sequential action sequences, and so when that doesn't always match up, I knew that that was sort of one of the issues. So that was one of the problems, but it's such a minor problem, and certainly I feel like Blade of the Immortal really is a suitable title for a lot of American comics readers to easily get into. You know, it is a samurai drama, but it's very accessible, despite all of the Japanese in it, you know, despite the historical context. It's a good story, it's beautifully illustrated, it is different than a lot of manga. It's similar than a lot of manga, but it is different than a lot of manga, or at least what I think the first thing that you think of when you think of manga. It's not that. It's a little different. So I feel like it's a really good entryway into manga, particularly if you can handle all of the violence. Yeah, so for me, it was an easy 5 stars. Even when I was like, oh, that's not really perfect, oh, that's kind of drags there, I was still completely invested in the story, invested in the characters, invested in the art, and for me, art is everything. And that's just how it is. The art is so overwhelmingly powerful that it's worth reading, in my opinion, and I definitely will be reading this again. So I found it a really wonderful series. I recommend that you read it if you think you can handle sort of the violence, because it is worth reading for sure. So this is a 10-volume series. It was mostly translated by Dana Lewis and Torrin Smith. I think the last volume, if not a couple of the last volumes, were translated by Kumar Sivasubramanian, who I was reading his translations last year, quite a few of his translations. I think the translation is really good, but I think the thing to note is that this is a reprint and it still has the old translation. The old translation of the old edition, which I think was originally 31 volumes, and now years later is in 10 of these omnibus. This is the smallest omnibus, and they just get bigger from here. So I just think it's really interesting that this didn't get an updated or a new translation. I think Dark Horse tends to do reprints in the most traditional sense. This is a reprint. So that's something to think about. You know, if you already have the smaller tankobon, then you probably don't need the omnibus. You definitely, with the tankobon, you are getting all of the color illustration for the covers. All of those cover illustrations are in this book, but you do not get them in color. So that is sort of the one drawback. The publication itself, though, they're these huge, heavy omnibus. They're really heavyweight, nice paper. They're beautifully printed, and you will, you know, if you can look up close to any of these volumes, none of the spines broke while I was reading them, and I was reading them laying flat on my bed. So, like, they have really nice, flexible spines in a soft cover. But because they are so heavy, I did actually have a couple of them come damaged in the mail. I would really highly recommend trying to get them ordered at your local comic shop if they don't have them. Not only just because you want to support your local comic shop, but also because they are so weighty, and Amazon in particular sucks at shipping. They always throw things in bubble envelopes, and this will not survive a bubble envelope. So you do want to, you know, protect your books, protect your investment, and actually get something from a good place. So that's my recommendation for that, and I do recommend having it. If you aren't afraid of the violence, you won't regret owning these series. It is spectacularly beautiful. So I think that's it for this review, or this discussion, I think, of this manga. Hopefully that wasn't too long, and hopefully I said what I wanted to say. I don't know what I said, I was just talking. If you've read the series, let me know your thoughts down below. Let's discuss it down there. And if you'd like to read the series, let me know down below. I'd be curious about that as well. Anyway, thanks so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye for now.